Alright, so if you're getting interviews but not getting job offers, let me save you some time. Your CV isn't the problem. If your CV got you in the room, it did its job. The issue now is what's happening in the room. Something's going wrong in the interview process, and the good news is it's fixable. Because here's the thing most people don't realise. Getting invited to interview means you're already seen as qualified. On paper, you're a match. But interviews aren't about confirming whether you can do the job. They're about confirming whether they want you in the role. And that's a completely different test. So if you keep getting to final stage or second rounds, or you're hearing, you were really strong, but we've gone with someone else, this video is for you. I'm going to walk you through 5 of the most common reasons people don't get hired, even when they're perfectly qualified, and what to do to turn it around. Let's start with the most obvious one. And this is where most rejections start, whether they tell you or not. The first reason is this: you're not clearly articulating your value. You're probably answering questions. You're probably being polite, friendly, enthusiastic, but you're not selling the impact you've made. And yes, I know that word makes people uncomfortable. Selling. But interviews are literally a sales conversation. They're trying to figure out whether what you bring is worth investing in. So you've got to connect the dots between what they're asking, what you've done, and why it matters. If they say, tell me about a time you handled a difficult project, and you say, yeah, I worked on a few tricky ones at my last job. We had to hit tight deadlines, but we got there in the end. That's vague. It doesn't tell me anything. It's surface level. You're being agreeable, but you're not showing impact. Now, if you said instead, we had a 6-week timeline to deliver a client migration that normally takes 3 months. I rescoped the plan, cut 2 non-essential features, and got cross-functional sign-off in the first week. We hit the deadline, saved the client from churn, and ended up getting 2 referrals off the back of it. That's value. That's impact. That tells me how you think, how you work, and what you actually did in a difficult situation. The second reason people don't get offers is down to energy. And no, I'm not talking about bouncing off the walls confidence. I'm talking about engagement. Are you showing up like someone who actually wants the job, or do you sound like you're just ticking a box? A lot of people, especially those who've been interviewing for a while, start to go flat. You stop getting your hopes up. You try to play it cool. You want to seem professional and measured, but what the interviewer sees is someone who just isn't that interested. The annoying part is that interest often trumps experience. If there are 2 candidates, one with slightly more experience and one who's clearly more engaged and excited to join, they'll go with the second one 9 times out of 10, because that person's more likely to get stuck in, more likely to stay, more likely to care. So if you're holding back because you don't want to seem too eager, stop. Let them see you're invested. Tell them why you're excited. Tell them what stood out to you about the role or the company. Don't assume they'll know. The third reason, and this is a subtle one, is that you're giving great answers but not making yourself memorable. And this happens more than people think. You go in, you answer every question reasonably well, you're polite, you've got the right background, and then 2 hours later, the hiring manager says, yeah, they were fine. But I'm not sure it's not that you said anything wrong. It's that nothing stuck. You didn't give them anything to remember you by. You didn't land a single standout story, or a killer example, or even a sense of what kind of person you are to work with. Remember, interviewers often see 5 or 6 people in a row. If all your answers sound generic or textbook, you'll get forgotten. You need to give them something sticky, something specific. That doesn't mean being outrageous or oversharing. It just means being real. Tell actual stories. Show some personality. Say the thing in a way that only you would say it. That's how you stand out. All right, that's the first 3 reasons. You're not showing impact, your energy's off, or you're forgettable. The good news is all of those are fixable. You don't need to change who you are. You just need to shift how you show up. In the next scene, I'll give you the other 2, including the most common one I see at final stage, and show you exactly what to do about them. We've talked about not showing impact, low energy, and being forgettable. All 3 of those will quietly kill your chances. But this next one is probably the most common reason strong candidates get rejected, especially at final stage. It's this: you're not making it easy for them to see you in the role. What I mean by that is, even though you're qualified, even though you might be saying all the right things, you're not drawing the line between what you've done and what they need. And when that connection isn't clear, they start to doubt. Now, you might be thinking, well, they've seen my CV, they know I can do the job. But that's not how it works. An interview isn't about verifying your experience. It's about helping them feel confident that you'll be able to step into this specific role, in their environment, with their challenges. So it's on you to make that link really clear. Let's say the job is all about scaling a new process across multiple departments. If you've done something similar, even if it wasn't at the same scale, bring it up. Don't just say, yeah, I've worked on rollouts before. Tell the story, talk them through it, make it easy for them to imagine you doing it again, for them. You're not just describing your past, you're helping them visualize your future. It's the difference between saying, I've managed teams before, and saying, I've led teams through major change, including rolling out a new ticketing system across 3 sites, which meant managing resistance, training sessions, and tight deadlines. That sounds really similar to what you're doing here, so I imagine the challenges will be comparable. That last line, that's the key. You're literally making the link for them. You're drawing the line between your experience and their reality. And that's what gets you hired. Now, the 5th reason, and this one's a bit tougher, is that you're not showing enough self-awareness. You might be hitting all the marks on paper, but if you come across like someone who can't take feedback, or who can't reflect on mistakes, or who always has an excuse, that's a red flag. And a lot of people do this without even realizing. It shows up in little ways, like when someone asks, what's an area you're working on? And the answer is, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, or I care too much about my work. Those aren't real answers. They're deflections. They sound rehearsed, and more importantly, they don't tell me anything useful. A better answer would be something like, in my last role, I realized I wasn't great at delegating. I take on too much and burn myself out. It came up in my one-to-ones, and I've been actively working on it, setting clearer boundaries, looping others in earlier, and being okay with not doing everything myself. That's honest. That's mature. That's someone who's coachable, because no one's perfect. Interviewers know that. They just want to see that you're self-aware enough to spot your blind spots, and proactive enough to work on them. It also shows up when people talk about past roles. If you're constantly blaming your old manager or saying every job you've had was toxic, that's a red flag too. Even if it's true, and sometimes it is, it still raises questions. Because employers are thinking, what's this person going to say about us in 6 months? You want to own your story without making it sound like everyone else was the problem. You can say something like, there were a few leadership challenges in that business, and it made me realize how important communication is at the top level. It's one of the reasons I'm really drawn to the way your team talks about transparency and culture. That's a subtle shift, but it's powerful. You've acknowledged a bad experience without sounding bitter, and you've tied it back to why you want this role. All right, so those are the 5 big ones. You're not showing value, your energy's off, you're forgettable, you're not helping them picture you in the role, or you're lacking self-awareness. Most people who don't get the job fall into one of those buckets, or a mix of them. But here's the good news. All of that's fixable. You don't need to become someone you're not. You don't need to memorize scripts or pretend to be overconfident. You just need to start thinking like the interviewer. What do they need to feel confident saying yes? What would you want to see if the roles were reversed? Now I'm going to walk you through how to prepare properly. Not in a robotic, over-rehearsed way, but in a way that helps you sound sharp, present and confident without overthinking it. I'll show you what to focus on, what to ditch, and how to walk into the room knowing you've got this covered. Good interview prep is about knowing your stories, knowing your value, and being able to talk about both without sounding like you've rehearsed it in the mirror 50 times. Let's start with the basics. You need to know the job description, properly know it, not just glance at it on the way in. What are they actually hiring for? What do they need this person to walk in and solve? What challenges are they dealing with? What are the priorities? You don't need to tick every single box, but you should know where your strengths match their needs. And that's where you start building your prep, around alignment. So instead of memorizing answers, you're getting clear on the key points you want to land in the conversation. What you're aiming for is a handful of strong, specific stories that show how you've delivered value. These don't need to be dramatic, they just need to be real. Something you actually did. Something with a bit of structure. Problem, action, result. You know the drill. Think about times you fixed something, improved something, delivered something tricky, worked with difficult people, saved time or money, all the usual suspects. And then get really clear on the takeaway. What changed because you were there? That's the gold. You don't need 20 stories. You need 5 or 6 good ones that you can flex depending on what they ask. A project that shows leadership might also show stakeholder management. A time you handled a complaint might also show problem solving. Keep it simple, but clear. And yes, practice saying them out loud, not to make them sound perfect, but so you're not figuring them out mid-interview. You don't want your brain stalling halfway through. You want to know roughly where each story starts and ends. That's all. The other thing you want to prep is your own questions, because that's another trap people fall into. They get to the end of the interview, and when they're asked, do you have any questions for us? They either say no or they ask something generic they don't actually care about. That bit of the interview is a massive opportunity. It's not just a box tick, it's your chance to flip the dynamic a bit. to show that you're not just trying to get a job, you're trying to figure out whether this job is the right fit. And that makes you look like someone who knows their worth. So ask about the team. Ask about how success is measured in the first 3 to 6 months. Ask what's keeping the hiring manager up at night. Ask what they'd want you to focus on in your first few weeks. Real questions. Questions that help you understand what you'd be walking into. You're not trying to impress them with how clever your questions are. You're trying to open up a real conversation. That's the bit most people miss. Let's also talk about body language and delivery. Because again, this isn't about trying to act a certain way. But how you come across does matter. Are you showing up confidently? Are you grounded in your answers? Are you present in the conversation? Or are you rushing through it, just trying to survive the hour? You don't need to be slick. You just need to slow down, give yourself time to think, and speak like a human. It's okay to pause. It's okay to say, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. You're not on stage, it's a conversation. And if you mess something up, which everyone does, by the way, don't panic. If you ramble or go off track, just pull it back. Say something like, sorry, I went a bit off topic there. What I meant to say was, nobody cares if you have to reset. They care that you can stay composed. The last part of your prep should be mindset. And I know that sounds fluffy, but seriously, the way you feel going into the interview affects how you perform. If you're walking in thinking, please let this be the one, you'll show up differently than if you walk in thinking, let's find out if this is actually a good fit for me. Interviews aren't a test. You're not trying to give the perfect answer. You're trying to see if this role, this team, this culture actually works for you. And when you come at it from that angle, the pressure shifts. You stop trying to perform. You start trying to connect. That's where the good interviews happen. So that's what real prep looks like. Not memorizing, not scripting, just clarity, confidence, and knowing your own value before you walk in the door. All right, so you've nailed the prep. You've gone into the interview clear, confident, and focused. Now let's talk about what happens after the interview, because this part gets ignored, but it matters just as much as everything else. First up, follow-up. Should you send a thank you email? Yes, every time. Not because it's polite, but because it's a low-effort way to reinforce your interest and professionalism. It's not going to save a bad interview, but it can help tip the scales if things are close. It doesn't need to be a long essay. Just a short, sharp note. Thanks for the time today. Great to learn more about the role and the team. I'm even more interested now, and I'd love the opportunity to move forward. Let me know if you need anything else done. That's enough. Don't overthink it. Now let's say you don't get the job. You get that dreaded line. You were great, but we've gone with someone else. Or worse, radio silence. No feedback, no explanation, just nothing. That's hard, especially if you felt like it went well. Here's the truth. Most companies are bad at giving feedback, not because they're being cruel, but because legally and logistically, it's safer and easier for them to say nothing. Or they'll fall back on that line we've all heard. There was just someone with a little more experience. What that actually means is you didn't stand out enough. Not in a bad way. You just didn't give them a strong enough reason to say yes over the other person. Which is frustrating but also useful because it means there's still room to tighten up how you're presenting yourself. But here's the mindset shift. Every interview is data. Whether it goes well or not, you can learn from it. Did you feel clear and confident, or did you waffle? Were there questions that caught you off guard? Did you talk about outcomes or just responsibilities? Were you actually excited about the role, or were you just trying to land something? After every interview, win or lose, write it down. What worked? What didn't? What do you want to tweak for next time? That reflection is what stops you repeating the same mistakes over and over. And if you do get feedback, use it. Even if it stings. If they say you came across too vague or too passive or didn't seem engaged, listen, it's not an attack on your personality. It's a signal that something in your delivery needs adjusting. That's fixable. That's something you can work on. Now, if you keep getting close, but no offers, second interviews, final stage, maybe even being told you're the backup, don't panic. That means your CV's working, your background fits, and you're doing a lot right. You just haven't quite nailed the performance piece yet. And that's actually good news, because it's easier to improve how you communicate your value than it is to gain more experience overnight. What I often tell people is this: you're not being rejected for who you are. You're being rejected for how you're presenting who you are. That's a massive difference. You can fix that. And once you do, things tend to move quickly. One final thing, don't let rejection get in your head. I know that's easier said than done, especially when it happens over and over. But rejection in the job search doesn't always mean you're not good enough. Sometimes it just means someone else had an edge on the day. That could be chemistry, that could be timing, that could be internal politics. It doesn't mean you failed. But if you stop trying, if you start dumbing yourself down or applying for roles you don't even want just because you feel stuck, that's when it gets dangerous. Because that leads to bad offers, bad moves, and ending up in the exact same position a few months later. So give yourself space to be annoyed. Get frustrated, that's normal. But then reset. Reflect. Improve your prep. Sharpen your answers. Keep applying. Because the truth is, most people don't get offers because they never learn from the process. They just keep doing the same thing, hoping the next company sees something different. But you know better now. You know what to fix. You know how to show impact. You know how to bring energy. You know how to make your experience land. You know how to show up like someone who actually belongs in the room. And when you start doing that consistently, the offers come. That's the fix. Check the link in the description for my free CV template and toolkit, as well as other tools that will really help in your job search. Make sure to hit the subscribe button for more no-nonsense job search and career advice. Cheers!